Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gostola, and welcome to this broadcast. I'm the curator of the Dissenter newsletter and also the managing editor for shadowproof.com. And I'll be looking at this BBC host, Stephen Sackor. I believe that's his name. Stephen Sackor, who is the host of Hard Talk, who had U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning on his show and grilled her. I think held her more accountable than any U.S. official he's ever had the privilege to interview in his lifetime as a so-called journalist. So I want to get to that. I want to highlight that. It's a bit enraging to watch him go so hard against Chelsea Manning. And Chelsea has been touring. She has this book that was released about her story and how she joined the military, the struggles that she fought and overcame, transgender struggles, as well as struggles as a soldier who saw that the US was engaged in endless war and that it didn't sit well with her. And of course, she disclosed uh, over 500,000 documents to WikiLeaks. And we'll see that this person who hosts this show for the BBC is very hung up on the volume of information, which tends to be the case if you find yourself uh, really identifying with US security officials over, oh, I don't know, that thing inside of you as a journalist is supposed to like more information being available to the public so you can expose the inner workings of those in power and hold people accountable who actually will make an impact in the lives of millions versus someone like Chelsea Manning who is not doesn't have the kind of power of those individuals in those US government agencies. So we'll get to that. But first, I just want to say go to thedissenter.org. If you are not a subscriber already, become a subscriber of the free newsletter. There's also a premium option, and you can support this independent journalism on whistleblowers, on WikiLeaks, Julian Assange's case. He's still facing extradition to the United States, a potential trial. I have a forthcoming book that will be out in February on this, and I've worked on this for over a decade. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. And also, I'll say that next week, Monday, I will have an interview with Stefania Marizzi, who is the author of a book called Secret Power, which is her memoir, and it's about her time working as a media partner with WikiLeaks on the documents. And I'm excited to have her on and have a discussion. We've had interviews with her before posted to this channel. And she also endorsed my book. She's very kind enough to endorse my book. And I endorse her book. I have been going through it, and there's a lot for the world from an Italian perspective. And she's done great work trying to force the release of documents from governments that are implicated in the case against Julian Assange. So, as I said, let me take this down. Chelsea Manning has been touring, and she's gone to these various shows in the corporate or establishment press. And we did a whole hour, which you can go back on our channel if this is of interest to you. We did a whole hour when she was first making the rounds as her book was released. And she went on shows like The View. She was on CNN's Jake Tapper. She was on these programs, and there were highlights of them that were good. And then there were highlights of them that were pretty annoying. But this one actually is worse. This is one of the worst interviews I think Chelsea Manning has been subjected to in going around and promoting her book. And this was really quite aggressive on the part of Stephen Sackor. And so let me play this. We'll start with, I have 3 clips. The first clip is what BBC chose to post from this program. And because I'm in the United States and I do not live in the UK, I'm not able to watch video of the entire program, but I was able to record audio and crudely reproduce audio for this so I could still break it down. And after we showed the clip from the video that was shared by BBC and what they particularly chose to highlight, then we will go through the other two clips that I pulled from the podcast as it was uploaded to the podcasting platforms. It's available around the world, but as far as the video, BBC won't let people watch it if they're outside the UK. So this state media that has this show won't allow it to be viewed by people outside of the United Kingdom. So here is Stephen Sakor, and we'll just follow. This is probably the highlight of the exchange that he had because it is so aggressive on his part, as I said before.
You didn't go through these files to look at the individual stories they told. You couldn't possibly. There were far too many. We know you didn't. And that gets to the heart of the ethics of this case. You just put this information out there, gave it to WikiLeaks, not having examined it yourself, and not knowing that actually it did include some information which named individuals, which compromised individual security.
The U.S. government wasn't able to show, they didn't show that in court. So they made this allegation in 2010, but it appears that in 2011, whenever the Information Review Task Force reviewed this information, that it was a different type of information that I had access to that they included because they assumed that everything that I had access to was potentially leaked. And I did have access to source identifying information, and I did have access to human intelligence reports, but those were not included in the records.
Right, but you see, once it was out there, and WikiLeaks in the end dumped this information into the public domain, because of course you had no control over what WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, and the rest of them were going to do with it. They chose in the end to dump this information.
If they hadn't, then I would have done the same thing.
Would you?
I would have posted it.
And you say that now,
BitTorrent, or
knowing what we know. The media, for example, went through this information. This is back in July of 2010 when you did the first big dump was put into the public domain. The Times newspaper found the names of dozens of Afghans credited with providing detailed intelligence to US forces. The Taliban then went on the record saying, we are analyzing all of this data and we will take retribution against those individuals that we find in this reporting from WikiLeaks. Right. Amnesty International and the Open Society Institute then said, we have seen the negative, sometimes deadly ramifications for those Afghans who have been identified. That was all your work.
Right. And again, we went through a court-martial process, and those allegations didn't show up. They made the allegation that obviously the Taliban said that they were going to retribute against people, and then the government couldn't identify anybody who was held accountable or. So,
as far as you and your conscience are concerned, the fact that you don't know of specific individuals who were
we didn't. We were given a list of individuals who were placed at risk. This just didn't happen.
Well, they clearly were placed at risk. Whether or not retribution was eventually delivered to those people is another matter. But
there's no list of names for us to go through. We asked for it during our court-martial.
But the media found these names. I mean, it was quite plain.
They didn't. It wasn't presented before the court.
But even if it wasn't presented before the court, and I'm not answerable for what the prosecution did or didn't do, is it on your conscience that these names, you didn't sift the information. It turns out you did put names into the public domain. And I wonder now, having had many years to reflect on it, whether you regret that.
Well, no, I chose certain categories of information under the understanding of what is and should be in this kind of information.
Categories, yeah, categories.
Categories,
yeah.
Yes.
All right, so that's an odd place for it to end, but that's where BBC decides to cut it off. And it's an odd place to end because I listened to the whole episode, the whole edition of the Hard Talk podcast. And as she's saying, as Chelsea is very clearly saying, I went through a court-martial. I was held accountable. I was prosecuted by the U.S. government. Sir, what do you want from me? What are you trying to show the world? Essentially, I mean, what is Stephen Sakor doing other than being a stooge for the CIA who could get his family an all-access tour to the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., if ever he comes to visit on vacation, to get away from the stuffiness of London. What is the point? What are you trying to prove here? Because it was already litigated. The military in the United States prosecuted Chelsea Manning and achieved a sentence of 35 years in prison for the very thing that you are trying to impress upon her, that lives were put at risk. What are you doing almost 10 years later in having this out? I mean, is Steven Sackler threatened by the narrative that was put together in Chelsea Manning's book? I don't know, but he is very aggressive in going after her. And I know that he hasn't been this aggressive when it comes to people who were responsible for the Iraq War. I know he probably hasn't been this aggressive when it comes to people involved in the Afghanistan war. There's an infamous clip out there of Glenn Greenwald being invited on this very program, and Steven Sackler just relentlessly goes after Glenn Greenwald for engaging in journalism and publishing leaks from Snowden. And he calls out, Glenn calls out U.S. officials for lying. And Steven Sackler says, that's a damning allegation. And do you have any proof of it? If you're going to come on my show and say that people at GCHQ and the NSA are liars, do you have any proof? And then Glenn gets into a conversation. And so this is a person who seems to have unwavering faith in the national security apparatus of the United States, let alone the apparatus of his own country. I mean, this guy is effectively running a state media program. I haven't done my own analysis, but I imagine that Media Lens, the good people over at Media Lens, could fill everyone in on how identical it is to some of the more, I guess, beholden to Vladimir Putin shows in Russian media. I mean, that's always the metric for looking at how grotesque state media can be. So how the level of fealty that Steven Sackler shows for the British government, I imagine it's on par to one of the shows or some of the shows that you would watch on RT if you were living in Russia. And so here's this person going after and recycling this idea that the Taliban were out to kill individuals who were named in the Warlock documents. In fact, what we know is that the New York Times brought this to the attention of the Taliban. That's right. The U.S. media, by covering the war logs, brought the war logs to the attention of the Taliban. But they're not going to be put on trial. And Steven Sackler is not going to attack the New York Times ever. Nobody's going to go after them for it and they shouldn't. They should not be attacked. He keeps saying that Chelsea Manning dumped this information. She didn't dump any information. WikiLeaks didn't dump any information, but she certainly didn't dump any information because all the information went to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks had the information, then it was on them as an organization to curate the material and decide how to present it and publish it. And that material that WikiLeaks had in its possession, it then published, but it didn't dump the material. If he would pay attention at all to the extradition case in his country, he would know that there were journalists that partnered with WikiLeaks and took some pretty good care with the material. Those people include journalists like Stefania Marizzi, who is from Italy. And so, you'll notice that I'll just say that in this whole interview, he never questions or says anything about Assange's case. He never asks Chelsea about this case that is unfolding in his home country, which his government has allowed the extradition to move forward. It has been approved. Now it's on appeal by Julian Assange's defense, but it never crosses his mind that he is attacking journalism by a media organization, it's completely natural for Steven Sackor to sit here and try and hold the source of a media organization accountable. And again, I cannot stress how important it is to know that she already was convicted, sent to prison, did time in prison, and then had her sentence commuted by President Barack Obama. So for someone who to sit there and very anally try and hold Chelsea Manning accountable as if he is proving something that hasn't been proven before, it's senseless and it's mind-boggling. So here's another clip of this, but it's just audio. And this is an exchange that they have. And I believe it comes before or around the time that he is going after her for just plain old giving the material to WikiLeaks.
Right, because you were obviously destined to go to Iraq to do data analysis, to work in intel in one form or another.
Right.
You were warned, weren't you, about the dangers of leaking, of exposing information to the outside. You were also warned, I believe, about WikiLeaks in particular.
So yeah, it was brought up I was brought up by a contractor, civilian contractor who was training us. They mentioned it, and it was just sort of a thing in passing. I do recall that happening. I didn't really dig into it at that point. It was like 2008. So
right, you didn't dig into it, and yet within weeks of arriving in Iraq, you'd reached out to WikiLeaks, and you'd clearly made a decision to cross the most fundamental line of all, to actually reveal this confidential, secret information.
I don't think that comports with the timeline necessarily. I think that I spent quite a bit of time in my job and in my role, and obviously I was in various.
Well, I think by the end of November, you'd only arrived there a month or so earlier. By the end of November, you'd made the initial contact with WikiLeaks.
That doesn't comport with my understanding of the events now.
Well, it's the timeline that was put into the court, and that appears to be established by the computer records.
That's not the timeline that I'm familiar with. So I recall the upload coming up in January. But the first time that I ever, uploaded anything or released anything was in January.
Right. Well, yes, that's when you actually release things. I'm talking about the initial contact. But let's not quibble about a few weeks, because it doesn't really actually matter that much.
I think the timeline. I think it matters because I had some time to settle into my role. I had some time to really learn things and experience things.
So what was it that motivated you to cross that most fundamental line? In essence, to steal secrets and send them not just to anybody, but to WikiLeaks, where you knew they would be exposed to the whole world.
So he's quibbling with her, but then he says it's not worth it to quibble over a few weeks. But actually it is. It's essential. You're trying to change the timeline of events, just like the prosecutors who are going after Julian Assange. So for Steven Sackor to do this, it is actually media malpractice. And if Chelsea Manning's going to be aggressively pestered for blowing the whistle on Iraq and Afghanistan and diplomatic corruption and global cover-ups of human rights abuses and the co-signing of authoritarianism by dictatorships, it's all documented in these cables. The way that they cover for corporate power, go around selling weapons, working for Boeing and all kinds of other multinational corporations to advance policies that benefit multinational corporations and their ability to exploit vulnerable populations. If he's going to do that to Chelsea Manning, then the flip side is that you absolutely have to turn around and say to Steven Sackor that you're wrong. You can't make this up. You can't sit here and do this, because that's what the prosecution tried to do to Chelsea Manning, to act like she got to the base in Baghdad where she was assigned, where she was to work as an intelligence analyst, and where she was there doing what was considered valuable work. It was valuable enough that they, as she was dealing with some of her mental health issues, wanted to keep her on and continue to have her contribute. And you want to make it seem like she arrived there and immediately started working for WikiLeaks, which is the theory, the conspiracy theory that the Justice Department under Donald Trump embedded into the prosecution against Julian Assange to make him an aider and abettor of conspiracy to commit a violation of the Espionage Act. And so she's supposed to, if you're working for the Justice Department, if you were there, if you were part of that culture, then the idea would be that WikiLeaks recruited Chelsea Manning, except that's not what the timeline of events reflects. And that's why Chelsea Manning is taking issue with Steven Sackur here. That's why she's pushing back so easily. I mean, it's not hard to do, but that's why she can't tolerate this. Oh, well, when you got there, you immediately were into WikiLeaks, even though you had gone through training and they told you not to look at WikiLeaks, which, by the way, they weren't really aggressively doing that at that time, because when she joined the military, WikiLeaks had only been doing publications on places like Kenya. There was the Trafigura dumping scandal that happened. And so these things that were being exposed weren't really of any concern to the US government because they didn't target or expose the corruption of US agencies quite yet. And so then as that changed, that's when the US government ramped up its focus on going after WikiLeaks. And so it does matter. And you are quibbling. We don't have to quibble, but you are quibbling. And you're quibbling over something that's already settled. This is already settled. So the reason why Chelsea gets to push back is because the judge did not accept this version of events in the military court-martial against Chelsea Manning. She did not find this, because what you're describing is basically an aiding of the enemy. And she did not aid the enemy. She was found not guilty of aiding the enemy. So everyone involved in Hard Talk and all the producers who produced this sham of an interview with Chelsea Manning should be ashamed of themselves for going after someone who is an honorable individual so hard. And it's revealing. It says something about the culture within UK media right now that's gotten much worse, it seems, since they had to deal with the clampdowns that were coming from the intelligence services within the UK government over their coverage of Snowden's disclosures. I mean, what is this pettiness that Steven Sackur is displaying? It's horrid. All right. So this is a long clip, but this is the last one that I have. And then we'll wind down this discussion of Chelsea Manning's appearance on this show.
You didn't go through these files to look at the individual stories they told. You couldn't possibly. There were far too many. We know you didn't. And that gets to the heart of the ethics of this case. You just put this information out there, gave it to WikiLeaks, not having examined it yourself, and not knowing that actually it did include some information which named individuals, which compromised individual security.
The U.S. government wasn't able to show. They didn't show that in court, so they made this allegation in 2010, but it.
Oh, sorry, I grabbed the wrong clip there. Let me grab the right clip. Let's do.
You weren't familiar with them because there's no way you could have gone through the information. You just, to use the word again, dumped it. And after all these years, I'm fascinated to know whether there's a part of you that thinks you got it wrong.
I mean, I don't think I got it wrong. I think that this information needed to be made public. I think that any method that was made available, I would have taken. There was nothing that was going to stop me. There was no, if I didn't have anyone to go to and I was running out of places, I would have done this completely on my own.
In essence, are you saying you don't believe in the legitimacy of intelligence gathering, of secret government activity in the name of national security? Because Michael Rubin, a former Pentagon official, after after all of this, particularly the diplomatic cables, which upset him so much. He said Manning not only burned the sources of hundreds of diplomats around the world, she effectively dissuaded foreigners from ever trusting a future American official.
Well, on the other hand, you have Robert Gates, who basically says that this is nothing. This is a nothing burger. This has no impact on the diplomatic relationship with the United States. This is a Secretary of Defense.
It's not quite what he said. He said, in the end, we will get over this, that outsiders, foreigners look at the US, they realize these things happen, but they're not going to stop talking to us. But fundamentally, I'm just asking you whether you believe or whether you care that you might have compromised important aspects of US national security and intelligence gathering, not least because, for example, one cable...
Well, for intelligence gathering, I don't think so, because, you know, the US intelligence apparatus is a large apparatus. It's one in which, you know, there are many source methods that haven't been made public.
I'm just seeing now. Thanks everyone for letting me know I was muted and you didn't get a single thing I said. Embarrassing. I need a producer. I need somebody who can do this with me and tell me that as I'm going to the clip back and forth that I've just made a mistake. So thanks to everyone who is letting me know. But I'm going to get better at this, and I'm going to do more with this channel in the coming year, and eventually I'll be a pro, and this won't happen, but it seems to happen like every time I do a live stream. And those of you who are patient are pretty amazing to go along with this, because I would personally just close out of the video and not pay attention to me anymore. So let me just say what I was saying, and I'll say it in fewer words. And this was my rant. I don't know where this guy gets the idea that Chelsea Manning doesn't believe in the legitimacy of U.S. national security institutions. That could be a view of Chelsea Manning. You could make a pretty good argument for tearing it all down, giving all the damage that has been done. But the fact that she went to the trouble of disclosing the material and said that she wanted to spark a debate, and then had it all out there, and went through this court martial and has defended her disclosures and has said that she believed that this would contribute things that were positive to giving people more insights into how the U.S. fights wars, mounts counterinsurgency operations. The fact that she's selecting these particular documents. I mean, I don't get how it's brushed aside that she had access to tens of billions of files, but that happens at one point in this, in the entire edition of this show. It's just brushed aside by Steven Sackur, who acts like it's not that important, but it is. It's important because she could just have sent more and more and more and more information to WikiLeaks, but she only sent those particular files in which she had a reason to care about the contents of those materials. So it shows you that she's not just against the U.S. security apparatus. She's not just against the U.S. military, but she's somebody who believed when she did this act that it could be reformed. I don't know what she thinks now. It's been over 10 years. A lot has happened to her. I'm sure her mind has been changed significantly. I'm sure the way that she views the world is far different from the way she viewed the world when she was an enlisted soldier. But the point here is that Steven Sackur is being ludicrous here to go after her and act like she is someone who doesn't believe that security agencies should exist in the United States. It's ridiculous. All right. So having said that, I'm just going to move on to the next thing here that I had to discuss. And then that way I won't get myself in trouble forgetting to unmute myself after I show the rest of the clip. Well, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna come back to it because there's this very juicy exchange here that I want you to hear. So
that weren't even available to me.
Just a final one on the cables. There was one list of the most important national security sites around the world listed by US diplomats. And you, of course, you didn't necessarily know you were doing it, but you inadvertently released that to the world too. PJ Crowley, the State Department spokesman at the time, said you were effectively giving a targeting list to Al-Qaeda. Did that give you pause for thought?
I mean, look, we live in the age of radical transparency already at this point.
But what does that mean, radical
does that
transparency?
mean?
Well, it doesn't mean you don't have a personal responsibility. And I'm asking you whether
Look, I went through a court-martial process. I went through a court-martial process where evidence was presented before the court. We were given evidence. We were given discovery. We went through this process. I've taken responsibility. I've taken full responsibility for all of my actions. I've gone through this process.
You did, at the time of the court-martial, let's get to that, you did say that you recognized the damage you had done. So you to this day, do you recognize damage done?
Look, my job was essentially to make decisions in which I damaged people every single day. So among all of the decisions that I've ever made in my entire life, yes, I have caused, some harm. I've killed civilians. I've been involved in the death of civilians because I've made mistakes. This was just me doing my job. I was never held accountable.
Well, the leaking clearly wasn't you doing your job, because the military then decided...
I'm talking about the job that I was doing,
I know.
In Iraq. I was an intelligence analyst. I did this every day.
I understand that. That was the job.
There are dozens of people not alive today because of the job that I did. And and do I regret that? I mean, I feel that down in my bones, yes.
All right. Unmuted. So she did a lot of damage, as she says. And I think that's a very powerful statement from somebody who's a military veteran. And that's a grappling with what she did as a soldier that the United States government can't classify. She can't be accused of violating the Espionage Act if she says and expresses that she believes her role contributed to the loss and the death of many civilians. And for that's something that she'll have to think about for the rest of her life. It's what military veterans carry when they come back home. And it's something that many of them, at some point or another, if you listen to them, will powerfully articulate. And to say that to him, that's not what he wants to talk about. That's not the damage that he wants Chelsea Manning to be held responsible for. But she holds herself responsible for it. No, the damage that he wants her to be held responsible for is a figurative damage that is entirely concocted and made up. It comes from the US government's figments of their imagination, and now he is reflecting that because, as she says, she went through a court-martial. There were no lists of people given to me that said these were people who were impacted and died because I made these disclosures. Not a single person can be said to be dead because she revealed the information to WikiLeaks. And so for him to sit here and do this, like a prosecutor, he's cross-examining her. This is almost no different than if she would be on the witness stand and she was called to sit there and answer if she was going to give her side of the story, which is, what she did. That's what her book's about. Now he's playing military prosecutor here, even though Chelsea Manning was already convicted, even though she's already been commuted, even though this book is about moving on with her life. This book is about putting that chapter of her past before her. And I must stress this, only Stephen Sacker, and I like this, only Stephen Sacker of Poop is the person who is sitting here and doing this to such a with so much fixation on all these little minute details. This wasn't done on CBS's morning news program, weekday morning news program when Chelsea was interviewed. This didn't happen on The View to this degree. Even Jake Tapper wasn't really doing this. I mean, he nitpicked something she said about how veterans don't care about Iraqis, and he thought that that was obscene. But he didn't even go through this when he was interviewing Chelsea Manning, and he usually really cares about the military's perspective. And other shows, I mean, there's no clip. There's no clip from a U.S. show, but we've got this, the BBC for you, everyone, in case there were people at the Pentagon or those at the CIA who were concerned that Chelsea Manning was going to go around. I know this really gets under the skin of Mike Pompeo, the baggy skin of Mike Pompeo, who did not have surgery. I just want to emphasize he did not have any surgery. That was all naturally lost weight. He naturally lost all this weight. So Mike Pompeo, Mike Morrell, any of these former CIA officials who are offended when they see Chelsea Manning on TV. Here's Stephen Sacker coming in for the side of the CIA to make sure that Chelsea Manning answers all of these questions. So, yeah, there you go. All right. I talked about that for a long time. There's a couple of things that I want to do and get through quickly. And the first is there's a lot going around about problems with the WikiLeaks website. And I don't exactly know what's going on. I asked one person I know who can get me information about what is going on with the WikiLeaks website. But there's this story that was written for the Daily Dot. And I guess it's kind of a follow-up story. I'll go ahead and put this up on the screen here. And this is the article. It is right here. So, all right. Pull it up here. So you see the headline. WikiLeaks website is struggling to stay online as millions of documents disappear. Of its alleged 10 million documents leaked, less than 3,000 remain accessible on WikiLeaks' website, is the claim that this article makes. And so I had quite an objection to this article, not because I don't think these technical issues are happening. There are these 502 bad gateway error messages that you get trying to access files on the WikiLeaks website. It does look like it has some structural problems, and it does look like the archives that the people at WikiLeaks are having a difficult time maintaining the website. But what I don't understand is if you go all the way through the article, it isn't until the bottom of the story that you see any mention from Mikhail Thalen for the Daily Dot about the extradition case that is unfolding, which is an overhanging problem for any effort on the part of WikiLeaks to maintain their website, to keep the archives functional so that people around the world, historians, researchers, those writing books like me, I was working on a book. I wanted to be able to view the materials. I had to go find them on obscure mirror sites in order to make sure that I was mentioning and referring to the contents accurately, that I was, in order to quote them, I had to go find them on a mirror site that wasn't wikileaks.org. And that's sad, but it's also probably a symptom of the CIA's war on WikiLeaks and the larger US government's war on WikiLeaks, the constant effort to make sure that this organization, those materials out there are not accessible to the public. And as much as people are able to find ways to post them and have torrent files so they can be downloaded, backups of it, the main site that everyone wants to go read is wikileaks.org. And that's the website that I think is pretty dysfunctional. And so the article raises questions about the certificates for the WikiLeaks website that are not being renewed. It questions the submission system, the security of it. I mean, the last time WikiLeaks asked for leaks was back in January. It's been 10 months. I don't think it's in any state to receive leaks and work on those leaks. And I think that the way that it is described in the media and the amount of attention that it gets from the CIA and other organizations would tell you that people are not going to want to be sources and put themselves at risk and give materials to WikiLeaks. As much as WikiLeaks may want to say, give us these files, it has a lot to prove about whether it can protect the security, but that's not really their fault. Not really their fault. The most powerful country in the world is trying to bring their founder to the US and put him on trial. And I think that if you're going to talk about the problems with the website, that has to be the frame. If you're going to talk about these technical issues, and I'm going to accept that you are raising these issues in good faith, I need to hear you talk about them in the context of how this organization has to focus on the defense, the legal defense of their founder, who is in prison at Belmarsh and is not allowed to be out on house arrest with his family, working as an editor-in-chief, maintaining this organization. And there might be a trust factor. There have been efforts to infiltrate WikiLeaks and giving people access to maintain the website. I don't know who's going to be trusted to be given the keys to work on this website. And okay, so there's people there. I don't know. I'm just talking this out. These are all things that don't enter into the reporting that came from the Daily Dot. I don't think it's malicious reporting necessarily, but I do think that the framing is off, because it should be that there is a more holistic discussion about why the site is dysfunctional. I don't blame WikiLeaks for being focused on freeing their former editor-in-chief and putting on the back burner any efforts to secure the submission system so that it can receive leaks, and any efforts to update the site and maintain the archives. Unfortunately, all of that is secondary to fighting this unprecedented and dangerous prosecution that has quite a lot of impact on press freedom riding on it. That if this is allowed to unfold, that it isn't just going to affect sites that receive leaks like WikiLeaks, but it's going to mean a lot for independent journalists like myself and others who don't necessarily have institutional support, people that aren't Steven Sackur. But that's not even journalism, just being a host of a program like that and interviewing people weekly. That's more entertainment. And that's fine if you want to do news entertainment, but journalism requires you to be doing reporting. And I don't think Steven Sackur does that anymore. That being said, one more thing I want to raise is this incredible quote that comes from an editor that was working for the Associated Press. So I'm going to reference my friend and colleague, Chip Gibbons, who has his newsletter. He wrote about this quote: "I can't imagine a U.S. intelligence official would be wrong on this." Okay. All right. So what's that from? That came from this story that the Associated Press published about the fact that there was a Russian missile that struck Poland. You might remember this was what happened last week. People were in a frenzy, and there was a bit of chaos for a few hours as it looked like a chain of events might be triggered that expanded the war in Ukraine beyond the borders of Ukraine and drew Western countries, European countries, and even the U.S. military forces into it in an even greater capacity than they are already involved. And so the Associated Press put this out, and then now a reporter has been fired, and there's a section of this referring to the Washington Post story highlights internal Associated Press communications where there was misunderstanding. And this reporter, his name's James Laporta, got this tip from a U.S. official. And we don't really know what the U.S. official's standing was, why they were taken as authentic. But an electronic message came in around 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, and the editor immediately asked if the AP should issue an alert on his tip, or would we need confirmation from another source and or Poland? After further discussion, there's a second editor. And the second editor said that she would vote for publishing an alert, adding, I can't imagine a U.S. intelligence official would be wrong on this. This person works for the Washington Post, and they said, I can't imagine a U.S. intelligence official would be wrong on this. And then there's more details here that the person at Associated Press, familiar with the larger conversations surrounding the story that day, said that Laporta, the reporter, had told his editors a senior manager had already vetted the source, which left the impression that the story's sourcing was approved. While that editor had signed off on the previous stories using Laporta's source, that editor had not weighed in on the missile story. But anyways, it also mentions that none of these other editors are going to be disciplined. So Laporta has lost his job, but the editor who didn't think it was worth it to have skepticism about this information and maybe follow up and look at other sources before going forward and pushing this out there, and they wanted to be first. The Washington Post wanted to be first with the news that we were on the brink of bringing this to the point where we could probably call it World War III. And so it's just incredible that this happened. And the idea that there is no institutional memory, you are supposed to will this out of your mind. You are to have amnesia if you work at the Washington Post, to sit there and be like, I don't think a U.S. intelligence official could be wrong on this. Like, you don't remember Gulf of Tonkin. Like, you don't remember the way that the U.S. government lied about babies in incubators in order to draw the United States into a conflict against Saddam Hussein. That you don't remember the way that claims were manufactured around the Iraq War, or that you don't remember the lies we were told about how torture was effective and we were obtaining intelligence, or that you don't remember the lies that we were told about how accurate drones were in killing people and the number of civilian deaths and how there's really not that many people being killed, except there were lots of people being killed. And to sit there and say, I think that there's no reason why a U.S. intelligence official would lie to us about this. Well, U.S. intelligence official, maybe they're not lying, but they could be wrong about this because they're disposed to believe that Russia would target Poland. And that's bad. When in fact, what it turned out to be was that Ukraine had fired a missile, and that missile struck Poland. It hit and exploded in Poland. And whether they were trying to spark something greater, I know there are a lot of theories about whether Ukraine was trying to instigate some kind of greater level of involvement from the world, because they were getting crushed and pummeled in Kiev that day. But I don't know. All I can say is the idea that if you work for a news media organization that you wouldn't check to make sure this U.S. intelligence official was correct tells you all you need to know about the culture of a lot of these media organizations, why, they are the kind of people who would be very good for a show like Hard Talk, hosted by Stephen Sacker on BBC. And they're the complete opposite of individuals like Chelsea Manning. They do not show courage. They are submissive people who will take whatever crumbs U.S. officials give them, and they hope to be able to manufacture breaking news stories that can drive people to their website, even if the risks are that we get pulled into World War III. So that's all I have, but it's been good chatting with you. There's a holiday weekend here in the United States, so I wanted to do a little something before I have a bit of a break from journalism for a few days. But when I come back, I'll have some announcements. There'll be things I'll be talking about related to this channel, and I'll start talking about things that I have planned for next year in 2023. And we're going to be doing more with Shadowproof, my partner Brian Sonnenstein and I have been doing a call-in show. There's plans to do more with him on this channel in the coming year, and I'll share all of that with you. I'm very excited for what I have in the works, and I'm thankful that there are some really good people who tune in and watch this little live stream when it takes place, and you're patient with me when I forget to unmute. We'll get better. The good news is the more that I do this, and it's actually not the first time I've done it. I've been doing this on YouTube and working with the software for like a year and a half. But anytime that I incorporate videos the way that I've been doing, I seem to fall into that rut. So thank you for being patient. And I might go back and do some cutting and editing for the larger public. But it was nice to be able to talk and go back and forth with you. I'm just going to look at any comments. This is Rob saying, thank you, Kevin. Peace all. And then this person mentions that they saw Stephen Sacker debating Morandi, the professor from Tehran, on the Iran nuclear deal. Morandi humiliated him. It's hilarious stuff. Yeah, I imagine. He doesn't really have much. He's got his talking points. And if you push Stephen Sacker on them, he just seems to get irate. And, he's like a 60-year-old gentleman now. So he starts to get really cranky and upset that those talking points didn't do enough work for him, that like he's coming off as ill-prepared for the interview. And I think he probably yells at his producers after because what he was given was garbage. But he seems to have full faith in the garbage that is given to him to read on his program. So, yeah. And support Media Lens if you can. They're great at holding the UK media accountable and documenting what goes on there and why figures like Stephen Sacker get to do this to people like Chelsea Manning on a daily basis. And, why BBC is probably going to, be part of the problem when it comes to allowing people to have their right to protest and demonstrate and force the government to take action on the climate. It's funny. The Just Stop Oil crew gets on air on the BBC and is interviewed, and one of their own is saying, what are you doing, BBC? This is a threat to all of humanity that we must face and deal with. And you're asking me, am I bringing people along to fight climate change? What are you doing to fight climate change? So, all right. Well, it's been really good to talk with all of you. And let me just put this up at the end there, that you can go to thedissenter.org to subscribe to the newsletter. And also, there will be a new episode of Unauthorized Disclosure Weekly podcast. I got an interview with Joshua Frank. That's coming on his book. It's called Atomic Days. It's about the Hanford nuclear site in Washington State. It's a nightmare that he examines, and I'm really eager to share that with all of you. But those who are subscribers to the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast are already listening and enjoying that interview that has been posted for them. They have early access. All right, everyone. You're wonderful, and we'll talk soon. Bye.